Sorry, so I can see we have some hellos. So we will be using the chat box as a way to create some dialogue and conversation throughout this presentation. So we're going to get started. Today we're doing an overview of the African Nova Scotian and African Ancestry Learners Literacy and Numeracy Achievement Grant that is offered by ACSB from our region. So we're going to just give you a bit of an acknowledgement before we get started. Sean is going to be managing the PowerPoint presentation as we go through. So we're going to move into our initial piece. We do want to acknowledge that we are on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we also want to acknowledge that we stand in solidarity with the Mi'kmaq people as we continue to learn truths and reconciliation with them as well. We also want to acknowledge our ancestors, the brothers and sisters on whose shoulders we stand. This is not our singular work, it is our collective work. And we know that anytime we approach work that is focused on our students of African ancestry, that we are bringing all of that heritage, our lineage with us. So as we do this work, we are the presenters and the facilitators of this work, but it is not our work on which we stand alone. And I'm going to get just an idea for today as we set the stage for what the session is. It is a narrative. As part of our ancestral ways of knowing, storytelling is a big piece of what we do. So through this presentation, it is going to be a narrative. We are going to be walking through the stages and the steps that our region took to implement the Literacy and Numeracy Achievement Grant. And we're going to be looking at 3 areas as we do this. So the first area that we'll be looking at are the gains and the growth for our Black learners. And I will be using the words Black learners, learners of African ancestry, African Nova Scotian, interchangeably. And we reflect, when we say Black learners, we're reflecting all of our learners who whose roots and heritages are grounded in African ancestry. The second phase we'll be talking about is sharing the teachers' voices and their experiences. And then finally, we'll be talking about a brief overview or outlook of the framework that we used in our region to implement this grant. And you'll notice on the left side of the screen is Ubuntu. And in essence, that means I am because we are, and we are because I am. So as we share this story today with you, you become a part of the story. And so we welcome you to share and contribute through questions, through comments, suggestions, and dialogue. We were not familiar prior to, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't look in time to see how the engagement process would be. So I was hoping we could use voice, but we will be using the chat box. So please feel free to use the chat box to contribute to this conversation. Collectively, our growth enhances the academic experiences and well-being of our students who are in our system who are of African ancestry. So let's get started. When we think about this, this is a Black-focused, learner-centered approach. And admittedly, we are working in a system that has not served our students of African ancestry. So as we're doing this work, we are also learning. And we're learning, we're investigating, we're exploring what are the things that have impact for our Black learners? What are the approaches? What is the content? What is the pedagogy? All of those pieces is what we were trying to explore as we started to think about the implementation framework for our grant. And this is a beautiful picture. We get a chance to see some of our learners in actions, and we'll be hearing some of the voices of the teachers who worked with those learners. I loved being able to, the first year when pre-COVID, we were able to go into schools and just witness our learners engaged in the literacy and the numeracy with their grant teachers. It was really exciting getting pictures from principals with young readers at their desks instead of being at the office for disciplinary. So this was some of the really gains that we'll be talking about, not just the academic, the cognitive, but the affective gains that we were able to witness as a result of this work. And we'll give you an outline of the schools that we were able to serve. We're looking at a 2-year process. So we started the implementation phase with the framework in 2020. And you can see there that we had a number of schools we were able to serve. The flexibility of cross groupings were there as a result of not having COVID restrictions in place. And we were able to see an increase actually, so which was really exciting. As a result of the strong work that was done in 2020, we were actually able to increase the number of schools we were able to serve, as well as the number of students that we were able to serve. Our grant teachers were very creative, very invested, and we're thinking about, I'll just give you a little bit of a breakdown. Our grant teachers was this beautiful blend of teachers who had retired from our system, who came back to work short term, and then we had new teachers who were entering our system, who haven't yet secured full-time employment, who came. And seeing the two blend together, the investment was a huge piece of this work being successful. As a result, we were able to increase the delivery of the grant for the next year, 2021, and we were able to add additional schools, which also meant we were able to increase the number of students who were served. And being student focused, that was a huge important piece of that work from 2020 to 2021. So when we think about the highlights, we're going to talk about the highlights as we walk through this journey. And there was two primary places we saw growth and gains for our Black learners. The initial piece we're going to look at, and that's the piece that we don't necessarily talk about as much, but I think we'll be seeing a shift if we think about Black focus approaches and Afrocentric approaches. We recognize that we can't just educate the mind. We have to educate that heart, the soul of the human being, the individual as well. So we did want to be really conscious as we were working with our teachers to be tapping into the affective knowledges as well. And as a result of that, we're going to just look at a few of the things that were identified from the grant teacher shifts that they saw in students' well-being. And just to put that in context, I know that we have several people who are in right now who are working in some of our grant schools who are working very closely with our students. And we also acknowledge that school is not always that pleasant place for students to come. So well-being is huge. If our brains are detecting threat of any sort or any kind, whether it is first impact threat or something that has inherently been built up over years, which is a result of what a manifestation of what systemic racism can do, is your brain is not ready to retrieve or receive information. So acknowledging and noticing the well-being shifts was really critical for us. And we can notice just right now some of the key things that our grant teachers had identified, which was consistent across 2 years, was greater confidence in our Black learners, increased willingness to take risks, greater motivation and determination, a stronger sense of self as a learner. We had students who were, one teacher who had worked at one of the junior high schools was working with a female student in math, and she was debating and challenging with him. She saw herself as a learner, and he was so excited to see this change in her, who came in not confident in herself as a mathematician, but through this process and through the relationship piece, which we're going to talk about as we move forward, she was able to look at him and challenge him and debate with him. And so that's a huge piece. Pride in self. A number of students, I mentioned I was getting text pictures from a couple of principals in elementary, and students who have been who have been in the office more for disciplinary, were now moving into the office and wanted to read with their administrators. And just a huge sense of self overall, not just that academic, but feeling that sense of, I contribute to this school environment. My being is important. We also noticed that small group encouraged that collectivity and collaboration among learners. We are learning very quickly how that collective collaborative approach to learning can be a very big emphasis and a very important inherent style of learning for students who are of African ancestry due to the nature of our heritage. So that idea and planning deliberately with that as a focus was also something that we saw as a shift for our learners. We also noticed that learners felt comfortable and could articulate their strengths as learners. So they became advocates for themselves. They were able to talk to their grant teacher about what their needs were, what they knew, and what the tools were or what they needed to be able to accelerate their learning. We also saw that there was independence in identifying what supports their success. I don't know about yourselves, but as a classroom teacher, when I have a student who's able to tell me what they need, it just makes things so much more streamlined, so much more effective than the guessing game. And we had a lot of students who were starting to advocate for that for themselves. And the final thing, we had we had grant teachers who were collecting this information from students' perspectives. So they were doing self-assessments and doing feedback. And so one of the big things was this year from junior high students too, which I don't know for you all as an audience, but for me was a bit surprising because sometimes we still have that biased assumption that junior high students may be disengaged and not interested in being in school. But several of the feedback is from the grant delivery from students' voice was that through that trust, that development of trust with the grant teacher, they were more willing to and volunteering to attend sessions. And they also wanted to they wanted the grant to continue. So we had a number of feedback forms from people who wanted to be able to have the grant teacher stay on and wanted them to be able to stay. And that was from feedback that they were able to volunteer. So it was really exciting in year 2 to see the continuation, that growth, that progress. And these were often with teachers who were new to our program as well. So to the grant as well. And I'm noticing, yes, Sean said, if you have any questions, if you have anything, I know that there's a couple of schools with administrators who are on who can definitely contribute to this conversation. Like I said, this is not my work, this is our work. So those were some of the highlights that we pulled out. And I guess point of sharing that is we wanted to be able to really recognize that our Black learners are engaged. Our Black learners are motivated. Our Black learners are stimulated and they are brilliant. But we have to be thinking about how do we tap into that? And without connecting that well-being, that sense of well-being, the academic, the cognitive pieces of it aren't going to be as profound. Sean, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to also say that when we're looking at the highlights, as the regional coordinator, I'm always trying to figure out we've always said that our students are capable and able and can do the work. And so when these individuals came into schools, what I really liked about this whole process was that Rachel explicitly told them and the administrators that, hey, they need time to build a relationship, a rapport, a bridge to those students. And in providing that specific and explicit time to do that allowed for those for some of the results that you're going to be hearing about. And for me, what I'm always trying to figure out is once we pull away those tier 1 supports in those teachers being in those schools, what remains? What has shifted? And how can the administrators and present staff within those buildings continue that progress and what that could look like? So for me, I'm starting to see possibilities and bridges into after that 30 days or however many days we can get them in for. What does that look like continuing on for the rest of the year? And so, as Rachel said, this is a wrap up of year 2. We're going to go into year 3 of doing it this way. I'm really excited about the possibilities and what the knowledge that we've gained from what it is that we've been doing over the last few days, over the last few years, and the possibilities. So.
So now we're going to talk about the academic highlights, the cognitive highlights. And, you know, as a system, this has typically been the way that we've been measuring growth over time. So we're not negating that. We know that that growth, that acceleration is critical. And so at our primary level, where we were doing literacy from our elementary grades was literacy focused. So in our primary level, some of the key things that we were able to see as growth were greater abilities to recognize letters, growth in letter recognition. Letter recognition which is key to being able to decode text. Concepts about print, the ability to understand the way stories and books work so that they can also, again, decode text. They noticed that there was a demonstration of emergent reading behavior, students who were starting to engage with text and seeing themselves as readers. And then we also saw an increase engagement, independence with their writing skills, being able to represent their ideas using pictures, using 2 to 3 letters to represent words. And these are the things that we are expecting our primary learners to be able to take on. So through the short-term intervention, they were able to see students starting to do that, not just with the scaffolding, but then also independently. And then the hope is that transfer into independence into classroom helps that growth over time so that they're able to do take on more sophisticated literacy skills. In grades 1 to 3, consistently, and we had some fabulous teachers, retired teachers and young teachers as well, who came with a wealth of understanding of how to teach reading and writing. So this was a benefit to us as a team. And we were able to see that students were utilizing decoding strategies. They were able to use visual information to take apart and recognize words that were unknown to them. They were able to use meaning cues and structure cues at points of difficulty, or to confirm and affirm what they had already read. So making sure they're cross-checking. We noticed that they also were beginning to use multiple sources of information, which creates that cohesiveness as a reader. So they weren't as reliant on using 1 or 2 sources of information, but they were looking at using those multiple sources of information to cross-check it, to confirm, to self-correct. They also recognized that there were that maintenance of fluency and phrasing. They were attending to punctuation to guide fluency and phrasing. They were developing strategies as well to enhance their comprehension of text. The writing that we noticed was the willingness to generate ideas. So that reluctancy to write had decreased, and that willingness, and there was some really great positive experiences with some of the students who have become reluctant writers. And at grade 3, we know that if that pattern has existed from primary to grade 3, that shift, that change is very difficult. So the idea of them seeing themselves as writers in this brief period of time and coming in with ideas, wanting to write, and then that helps obviously being able to build the strategies they need to be able to compose their ideas. So they were able to write unknown words. They were using multiple strategies to do that. And they were using more than one sentence to represent their ideas. In the upper elementary, what we started to see and what teachers reported were also some similar areas of growth in terms of independence. So in upper elementary, they were noticing that learners in the areas of reading were integrating those sources of information. So now they weren't just relying on 1 or 2 and cross-checking, but they were doing it in congruency, which led to greater accuracy. With greater accuracy, we saw text level sophistication of text. What they were able to read also grow. They were self-correcting at points of difficulty, often without rereading, but with a mix of both. There was an intention to the focus on reading with fluency, that idea of reading that story and not just lifting the words, but reading it for that meaning, which also led to deeper comprehension strategies and willingness to talk about text with extended details as though they were intimately relating to the text and not just reading a book. And then students were taking on reading a variety of genres of text as well. So that willingness not just to be in that safety zone and I'm only reading narratives or I'm only reading information text, but exposed to different texts. And the richness the idea of that is just incredible. I think it just unleashes a world of opportunities as young readers to be able to say, this is something that I can do. So as writers, we noticed in upper elementary that there was a growth in the following areas: the composing of ideas and using the conventions of print and extending ideas, students' willingness not to say, I wrote something and I'm putting it away, but coming back and revising and shaping their pieces through the editing process, and the expression of ideas using different forms of writing. And then with our junior high students, numeracy was the focus, and there's a pacing guide. We were very conscious that we were doing things that would support them being able to acquire the outcomes, the skills and concepts they needed to be successful in the classroom. We did talk to the teachers if we needed to go back to skills and concepts that might have been taught in earlier grades. Computational fluency is a huge thing. Without computational fluency, it also will slow the processing of some of the higher order math operations that students are exposed to in junior high and high school. Despite that, teachers were still very focused on making sure that grade level outcomes was where they were putting their attention to. So if they took them back for a minute, it was to come back and put them back into what they needed to be successful in the classroom. So the three grades that we looked at were 7, 8, and 9, and the areas that we were seeing that success were orders of operations, divisibility rules, linear relationships, and measurements, looking at measurements from the measurement of circles to the ideas of developing formulas to be able to determine area. For grade 8, we saw growth in operations involving fractions and integers, and as well as measurement, determining surface area. In the grade 9 area, this was really exciting because it wasn't as much about the actual outcomes, but it was more about that math thinking. So they saw areas of growth and problem solving, and then we did get back into determining surface area and linear relationships. The grade 9 piece was really exciting because we heard some of the teachers talking about the thinking now the students were doing, and that cumulative process, that problem solving process in the feedback. That was really exciting because we know that's going to extend, and that's going to be something that builds independence and autonomy as they move into those high school. We also know that for our Black learners, there's an underrepresentation of Black learners in math, academic math courses. So we're hoping that through this, we're able to change that trajectory along with the work that's happening in schools with the great teaching that's happening already. Any questions about the academic highlights before we move forward? So these are some of the areas that we focused on. I got a 10-second delay, so I'll wait 10 seconds. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box. All right. If they come up, we'll obviously come back to them. So that's a little bit about the growth and gains of our Black learners, both from that well-being perspective and the cognitive perspective. The next element that we wanted to discuss is really about the framework. So what were we doing to try to make this systematic? And I was having a conversation with a colleague about the difference between systemically and being systematic. We wanted to be purposeful and intentional in what we were doing. So when Sean first approached me about taking on this within my portfolio as a CRP specialist, I was excited because it allowed us to play around with some things and say, okay, let's really discover what is going to be the structures, the approaches, the tools, the content, all of those things that may give our students, our Black learners, better access to the academic elements of what we're trying to do. So that was where the framework came in. And I had just a little background. I was teaching prior to moving into this role at a school prior to becoming a CRP specialist, and I was teaching grade 3. And the school had invited me to be able to do the grant position. And so I was really excited. I got a chance to combine my classroom as well as take time to be the grant teacher in this elementary school. But there wasn't really a structure in place. And so I know for me, and I felt pretty confident in my tools and skills with teaching literacy, but I wanted to make sure that what I was doing was meaningful and purposeful. I took that with me when Sean had asked if I'd be interested in leading this work. And so I was like, you know, what would have been helpful is having some sort of a structure in place so that as I walk in this very short period of time, I'm sorry, I have a 3 o'clock prayer, so I'm just going to praise God right now. Thank you, Jesus. I wanted to have something that in the short period of time, teachers could anchor themselves in, but not box them in. We also wanted to be responsive to where they are and who they're serving. So this is a look at the framework. So the intention of our framework, and this was also something we did, we hosted an initial PD before the teachers started in their school sites. We had a full day, both online this year and then face-to-face the previous year. And the purpose of this frame of pulling people together was really to build first, create that team approach. We wanted teachers to be able to reach out. Although I might have been monitoring the grant, I still had other responsibilities, and I wasn't the one doing the day-to-day work. So we wanted to build that collaboration in-house with our grant teachers. We set up a classroom page. They shared, if they felt comfortable, shared contact information. And that was a really valuable feedback from the end of delivery from the grant teachers. That was really important because they were able to connect with other teachers who were doing the work that they were doing, and being able to bounce ideas, being able to problem solve together. So that was one of the highlights from the framework and our initial PD session. The other piece of it was really wanted to ensure we were initiating an understanding as the grant teachers, as a team, about the experiences, the distinct experiences of our students who are of African ancestry and our African Nova Scotian students within our system. We can't keep doing the same thing and being like, well, this is not relevant. We needed to ensure that teachers understood the history, the experiences, the historical experiences that our students carry, and not use that as something that's going to be like lower the expectations, but raising the expectations with that understanding that how some of our students are coming into school may not be the way that they went into school, may not be the way I went into school, but we wanted to be able to give that give that validity to those experiences. The third piece that we wanted to be very intentional about is, and this is if you hear me talking ever again, this has become the piece I'm like hooked in. How many places can I get into that we can talk about? And Carla, you can give me a thumbs up if you haven't heard me say this before, is that cultural ways of knowing. We're talking about, how we're learning, processing information. And we've been very linear in the way that we've been doing this. So we wanted within the PD to talk about those cultural ways of knowing. How do we identify cultural ways of knowing? And how do we bridge that into our planning? And then the final piece of this was, how do we look at curriculum, Nova Scotia curriculum, and make meaningful connections to our Black learners? So using the learning styles and our understanding of heritage, where do we tie those, make that opportunity for the teachers to make those connections prior to meeting their students? So that was really the intention of the grant, of the PD. So the framework was broken into 4 key areas. So the first area, I'm just going to get Sean to stay there for a second. So the first area you can see in the screen during that PD day was talking about the structure, talking about the grant structure, and we broke the grant structure into 3 phases. The first phase was that getting to know one another, not just the teacher getting to know the student, but the student getting to know the teacher as well as a person, who we are, and not the relationship, just the superficial relationship, but how do we learn? How do we process? What are the things that are motivating to us? What are our interests? The second phase was the implementation phase, and that's where we dove into the lesson design, the delivery, the assessment, and the feedback. And then the final phase was that evaluation phase, so the overall achievements and gains of the grant. We wanted to give time for people to be able to break those into parts so that they could be very deliberate about gathering this information. And I'll be honest, that first year when I introduced this, it felt heavy. We had teachers that we got to this part of the PD, and we had teachers that at this point were not sure if they wanted to carry on. And I did have to be truthful and honest and transparent. This was student-centered. This is funding that is directly targeting the access of achievement for our Black learners. We have to put them first. They hung with us, and we're going to see in the video, the response at the end was really exciting. So sometimes we have to acknowledge you're going to feel uncomfortable in the way we may be doing something, but we got to just hang with it for a second. We're doing it together. We're going together. So we spent that day really being focused on that. This past year, we were able to incorporate the African Nova Scotian education framework. And this was so helpful in being able to really define that first phase, that initial phase. I'm going to do a chat box check. Thumbs up if, or give me some sort of symbol if, when we think about, that idea of we have to have relationships with our students, is still at a superficial level. So if you agree or disagree, when we talk about having relationships with students, if you thumbs up if you agree it's still at a superficial level, thumbs down if you think, no, we're getting it. It's deep and meaningful. So we're going to do a quick chat box waterfall. You got 10 seconds, which works out to 20 seconds, to put it in the chat box. Agree, we're still at a superficial level with how we get to know students, or disagree, we're still at a superficial, we're at a superficial level of getting to know students. 10 seconds starting now. All right. So either we got, I see, and that's Chris, I thank you. I love the extra. So Carla is saying it depends. We're striving for meaningful, definitely. Okay, and I know I've been at your beautiful school, and I know we are at varying places. We got a few, we got two thumbs up. We're gonna wait for a few more. And feel free, if you think it's a thumbs down, let's go ahead. Tell me truthfully. And I'm only seeing 3 responses. So there's 10 people minus some are others better than others. Yep, absolutely. Relationships are human, right? And we are human. Not everybody's warm and fuzzy. People who know me right off the bat, not warm and fuzzy. It takes time to build that rapport. Some people are quick and are able to make those relationships on a snap. So we have to honor that fact. When we're talking about building rapport with our Black learners, it was so helpful for us to be able to have Dr. Rex Simmons, who joined us during our PD with the grant teachers, to talk about the framework, to talk about the pillars, and we were able to identify 2 core pillars, 2 focal pillars, to help them really develop an understanding of who their Black learners were. And this took work. Again, last year at this point of the PD, it was vague for some of our teachers. And we're like, hey, how do we actually do this? What does this mean? So the 2 focal pillars that we looked at for the grant was, I'm going to get Sean to just move the slide. So the first focal pillar to help us was that idea of authentic self-identification. So the grant teachers were exposed to what does that mean? How do we really get to understand that richness, that wealth of history and heritage and knowledge and assets and all of those things within our school system? how do we get to understand who our learners are? So that was one focal pillar to help us guide this work. The second focal pillar that we used this year was knowing our learners as they are known. So who are they? How do they identify themselves? And we wanted to really make sure that this was time spent. So that initial phase, that getting to know your learners, these were two pillars to help us anchor in really getting to know who it was they were going to be working with over the next 35 to 40 days. After we did that and they spent that time, and one of the things that was really interesting, because people often said, okay, well, how many weeks is this going to be? How many days this was going to be? And there was no time frame. It was dependent on who the student was, it depended on who the teacher was, it depended on the climate, all of those things. And so some people found that they were quick to get to know some of their learners and were able to jump into the implementation phase, and sometimes it took a little bit longer. We knew it was impossible to do like targeted instruction over a short term without having that rapport. And it went against some of the things we have about time and that idea of urgency, because people are like, I wanted to get to the instruction, but like, if you get to instruction without this relationship, without this trust, the instruction you're going to do is only going to be temporarily held or not at all. It's going to come with resistance. And again, feedback at the end of the session, this time frame was critical. So once we got to that initial phase, focusing on how do we get to know our learners, how do we spend that time observing, we were then moving into that implementation phase, which was that planning piece of it. And so when we were using the planning, we were planning with learning and culture as being married together. We cannot divorce them. They don't happen in separation. We need to have them connected. And that was critical. So when we were making plans, I asked that our grant teachers reflect that within their planning, and what structure they used for planning, how they did that was up to them. I can't dictate that. I wasn't working with their students. I wasn't working in those schools with them day to day, and they're professionals. That's their professional judgment. But what should have been evident is how were you making plans that were centered on who that student was. So one of the tools that helped us with this was that our cultural tree of knowledge. We use that within our lesson design. So this is from Zaretta Hammond's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. We broke down those pieces, and I love this tree because it really talks about the importance of knowing our students beyond that top level of the tree, that surface culture, because it's very low trust, to getting to that core part of the tree. I'm pointing to my screen like you can see me. So we spend a lot of time on that core of the tree, really thinking about how do we get to know those elements of our learners, because that is where those trust, that relationship that's going to be able to go through the ebb and flows over time, is going to be much more secured. And then the second piece of this that we looked at for culture and learning being married was those cultural behaviors. And so we wanted to be able to identify, and Shiraki Hawley, this comes from his work, which also lends on the work of Asa Hilliard, Geneva Gay, Wade Nobles. There's a lot of work about the variances of culture, of knowledges. And so we've spent time being able to look at what does it mean? What are the 16 most common observed cultural behaviors in schools? How do we see that on the continuum of what that looks like? What does school reinforce as being preferred? And when we don't see that, what can that be telling us about that learner and their learning style, not as a behavior? So we spent time as a team looking at that, and then thinking about how do we build that into our lessons. So if we know that communalism, which we saw in one of the highlights of well-being, that idea of engagement increased when students were in small groups that were collaborative and collective, spoke directly to communalism. And so when that time of getting to know their learners, they were able to plan that piece meaningfully within their lessons. I'm looking at time, so I'm not the time thing. So that led to some major impacts for us over the 2 years. And some of the things that we were able to do, and we're going to listen to a video. I'm going to put a link into the chat box because we're not going to be able to watch it together. But and you have to go in through your GNSPES. So I'm just posting this link. But some of the major impacts for us on 2021 as a result of this work over time was we were beginning to see, some really incredible growth. We were able to increase service delivery by serving additional schools, which meant serving additional learners. We were able to continue the facilitate professional growth of the educators in our system, and those teachers who were retired was incredible. They came back the second year. At the end of the first year, I had retired teachers because we moved into COVID. Right at that first year was our last day. That March break was our last day where we came back together for our final PD session. And I was getting texts, I was getting emails from teachers, and mainly retired teachers, like, oh, I'm worried about COVID. Can I still try to meet with my students I was working with? The grant was done. And this was drastically different. Admittedly, we had a session at the end where we were able to come back and do a reflexive piece. And admittedly, we had a number of teachers who had been in our system for a number of years and said, I never did anything like this before. I wasn't thinking about teaching and learning in this way before. And then when 2021 came up and we were doing the grant again, many of those teachers who have retired was like, let me know, I'm in again. I want to do it again. And the reflection again this past year was equally powerful for many teachers. Is like, this is hard work. This is more than just us knowing our craft from a technical side. This is about that affective piece and how do we tie them together. So I'm sorry, I'm so excited. The other thing we got to see was that correlation between, and this is a big piece for us as a team within HRCE, is not just looking at how do we do better, but what does better, right? So we know we have to do better for our Black learners. That one is, signed, sealed, delivered. We already as a system have said we need to do better for our Black learners. It's not enough just to say that, but we have to actually put in practices. We have to put in approaches. We have to be able to understand what is doing better look like. So this grant also impacted us in that we were able to really look at what were some direct relationships, correlations between the practices and the impact on achievement. And when we think about achievement, again, it was that overall achievement. We had some students in our grant who actually academically were doing well, but it was that cultural attachment that they were able to spend time in. So we were able to look at that and see through this work and through the reports, be able to make some correlations and be like, okay, small group instruction, it's not just about that time and attention, but it's actually about some other elements within that cultural ways or cultural understanding that we were able to try to say, okay, should we explore that a bit more as a team? And I'm really hopeful next year that we're able to do that as we are looking to submit again another proposal to run this grant again and go even deeper with this. So I did just put a link in, and I do want I know it's a lot of my voice, so I put a link in, and thank you. And Carla, I know you're always thinking about what does doing better look like. I miss you too. So we're going to just take a minute, and if you open up the link and through your Google Docs, it will take you to the presentation. And if you go to the end of the presentation, I'm going to just get Sean to show you the slide you'll go to. The only reason we're doing this way, it's too low and you can't hear the teacher voice. So you'll go to this slide. It's very quick. So if you want to just move out, listen to the video and then come back in, and we're just going to close out with this. So if you have the video open, just give me a thumbs up when you're back in. So when you're back in the meeting, give me a thumbs up so we know we can get started again. So take some time to open that up. And if you have any problems, let me know. We'll be here in the chat.
Oh, we can hear it now, Rachel.
I can't. Only you can hear it.
Oh, okay. Are you noticing that they don't have access?
Okay, just 1 second. Okay, so I'm noticing you don't have access, so I'm just going to put another link. I changed the settings, so if anybody can access it with the link, so try and see if that helps, and if not, we'll just carry forth with any questions. And let me know if that works. Great, awesome, thank you, Mary. All right, so take a couple of minutes. It's not a super long video. I do hope you get a chance to watch it, and then once you finish watching it, we'll just come back and we're just gonna close out off of that. Oh, okay, Megan, let me check and see. Okay, it will need to set, I did change it to anyone can view it, so I'll just put it in, thank you. So Megan, it's not allowing her to open it. Megan, let me try posting the link again. And then just for the video, that's interesting. That's not doing that. I'm gonna try a second thing. If you can't watch it now, Megan, and Melissa, you saw it, so I'll send it to you, Melissa. Just 1 second though. Try to fix this up. So Megan, I know it's going to be about 10 minutes, so you're probably not going to get a chance to see all of it, but I'll try sharing this with you too. I'm going to just share the video. Okay, so okay, so Mary, I just sent the link for the video. Okay, great, awesome. Okay, thank you. So once you finish watching it, just give me a thumbs up when you're back so I know we can close out. Perfect. Thanks. So I noticed Carla was just adding some things from her video. And that's what I'm hoping we can see too. I think that was really powerful. Carla mentioned that the feedback from the teachers, getting to know the students, made them feel, supported and safe in an environment. So that was like one of the hugest pieces, not just this year, but also last year, that was consistent. Relationship, and that idea of a relationship and a strong relationship, because it wasn't always kumbaya and, happy moments, but it was in those moments where there was, that possible dissension, or like they were being stretched and they might have shut down. And once they got past that, they were able to continue to work. So we talked a lot about that ebb and flow. So I see Melissa has her thumbs up. She's finished. If you can just give me another sign that you are back with us, we'll just close out. And please feel free to add anything in the chat box too, in response to any part of the the session or the video or anything that was presented this afternoon, and we can just debrief, and then we'll enjoy the rest of this afternoon. Good question, Mary. So will this be expanded to other RCEs in upcoming grant periods? So we did do a presentation with that one through ACSB in the spring, and I'm not sure what the expectation is, because that would come from, obviously, from African Canadian Services branch. But we're also, I think one of the things I appreciate about us as a province right now is that although we're regionally, sectioned, we can communicate with one another. Like, if there's something that you were thinking of that may be supportive, and I think we can offer that opportunity to reach out. But in terms of it being formally launched, I guess that would be a decision based on ACSB. And then Sean, you can probably speak more to that than I could. Yeah.
We've been in discussion around this with the other regional coordinators of African Canadian Education Services to see about how we can go about doing this work. So I've been speaking with Marlene Ruck about this, as well as the other RCs around the work that Rachel has been leading, and working with administrators around trying to shift and change the environment in which our Black learners learn in. And so it's still up in the air, I guess. But there is a possibility, and doing presentations such as this, getting feedback from others, all kind of helps us to try to figure out how we can do this work with intention and purpose for explicit outcomes, and basically so that our students can show and prove that they can do what we've always said that they were able to do.
All right, so I know Megan is back, Mary is back, Miss Ann. All right, so those are really great and important questions. And I know from myself within my role, Sean and I, we're having this conversation because we're always approaching things from, you know, the lens of which we are working from, our experiences. And I know for me, like that pedagogy piece, I'm always interested in what's happening with our learners across the province and how can we learn from each other. So that cross collaboration is, you know, like I said, I don't know if there's barriers to that, but I'm always interested in looking at how can we work collectively to support the advancement of our Black learners within the system. Yes. Oh, look, Miss Ann. So Miss Ann is also on, was one of our host schools who is the principal at Nelson Wander Elementary School, and got a bit of a soft spot for the school. And she just mentioned that this was a power addition to the improvement and success of her learners. And the teachers, and in particular the students, rose to expectations in a culturally relevant Afrocentric atmosphere. We were really, really blessed and fortunate to be able to have one of our grant teachers work specifically at Nelson Winder that is focused on Afrocentric practices. And so each school had its own marked success, but that, I have to say, there was some really unique observations that did come out of the work that happened at Nelson One, because there's already a great deal of work around Afrocentricity and her teachers are working in that. So this enhancement or augmentation was really interesting, because you could think maybe it's overwhelming or too much, but it was really this beautiful sort of parallel of how to add that intentional direct support for that short term in conjunction with what was happening in a school that is focusing on Afrocentricity. So, and a shout out to Nelson Winder. So essentially, and I thank you, we were hoping this could be more dialogic, and I know it was a lot of me speaking, and hopefully there's some relevancy in it, and I'm not sure even we would have done a bit of a, you know, why you chose this session, but I'm hoping there's some relevancy in what was presented. And this really was, this has been an exciting element of the work I get to do within our system. It's one of my things on my portfolio that I love doing, and even COVID limitations didn't disappoint. Our learners are just incredible, and reading the feedback that they wrote, you know, particularly our junior high students, is so moving. But witnessing and hearing to the teachers who were working with students on a day-to-day basis, and how they were touched by the students they were working with, the learners, and what they learned from them. It gives us promise, and that we can actually stay true to what our system's goals are with our inclusive and equitable education policy, the guidelines, the directives within that policy. I think some of the work that has happened over the last 2 years has exemplified what we should be doing as a system that is inclusive, that really teaches to the talents and the gifts and the richness of each and every learner, and in this case, unapologetically our Black learners.
And I'd like to add too that none of this is possible without those administrators who opened up their schools and was willing to participate underneath our mandate, our structure, our framework, and to do it the way that we envision it, and work with us through this. So, you know, that it's all of these pieces that come together in order to make this session today, but the program itself a possibility. So thanks to all of them also.
Absolutely. And I didn't add that, I should have. Miss Ann and Carla, you could have caught me, is there was that piece too where administrators were a part of our PD session. They came in prior to our initiation of the grant. And, you know, so there was a commitment beyond just having somebody come into their school. There was definitely that connection. And I know from several other grant teachers, those conversations happened throughout the time in their schools. So it was very much a collective responsibility. Kucha Chakalia. So I'll just get Sean to move through. So thank you so much for joining us. I know we went a bit beyond time, and I don't want to keep you. We do appreciate you joining us. If you do have any questions or any further comments, feel free to reach out to us. There is a feedback form for the Summer Learning Academy, so please fill that out. I know that they're using this information to make sure they have quality opportunities for our system. And on that final note, I just say Ashe. So thank you for joining us. Ashe.
And there's the Ashe.